The collapse did not change the nature of the night. It only removed the illusions that once made you feel safe inside it. Before the grid died, darkness was a passive backdrop. After the grid died, it became an active threat vector. Every settlement that failed, every camp erased before dawn, every survivor dragged into the tree line at 03:17 a.m. Those events were never random. They were the result of people who misunderstood what night truly becomes when law, power, and surveillance disappear. Night is not a time period. It is a force multiplier for violence, deception, and asymmetry. When sight collapses, hierarchy collapses with it. Loud men with strong arms lose their advantage. Quiet men with patience and cold intent rise instantly to the top of the food chain. That is the operational reality you step into the moment the sun drops behind the ruined skyline. In the old world, you trusted walls, doors, locks, and the illusion of proximity. In the new world, proximity is death. Darkness compresses distance. The gap between safety and ambush becomes mathematically thin. You cannot hear what stalks you until it is already within 20 steps, and you cannot see what studies you from beyond the edge of your firelight. Most survivors react the same way on their first week in the dark. They cluster closer. They speak in whispers. They reduce movement. They think lowering their profile makes them harder to find. In reality, it makes their behavioral patterns predictable. Predictability is the currency raiders trade in. Your breathing changes, your pulse spikes, your decisions become emotional instead of procedural. That shift alone is enough to get you killed. The world collapses, but human instincts do not evolve. People still cling to the lie that night is merely a lack of light. It isn't. Night is an environment with its own rules, and it punishes those who mistake comfort for capability. Every failed outpost left behind the same trace patterns, makeshift defenses pointed in the wrong direction, blind angles wide open, firelight revealing silhouettes, and sentries chosen for loyalty instead of sensory acuity. They died because they applied daytime logic in a nighttime battlefield. If you want to last more than a season, you must erase the idea that night is an obstacle. You must treat it as operational terrain. You must understand that post-collapse raids do not rely on brute force. They rely on timing, surprise, and the invisibility granted by darkness. Raiders choose 0140 04 Katan 10. Because human cognition is at its lowest, body temperature dips, micro-sleeps occur, and discipline evaporates. You don't rise to the occasion in those hours. You fall to the level of your preparation. That is why night defense tools are not accessories. They are extensions of your awareness. They compensate for the biological limits that darkness exposes. They give you the one resource raiders fear: information. When you control information, you control engagement. When you control engagement, you control survival. This part sets the foundation. You are not defending yourself from raiders. You are defending yourself from your own instincts. Until you neutralize that internal threat, every external threat will always reach you first. Darkness does not create danger. It amplifies whatever danger already exists. That is the core of asymmetric darkness, and it is the doctrine every survivor must internalize before a single tool becomes meaningful. In daylight, information is democratic. Everyone sees the same shapes, distances, silhouettes, and movement cues. At night, information becomes a weapon owned only by the one who prepares for it. Raiders rely on that asymmetry. They are not stronger, smarter, or braver. They are simply willing to weaponize the blind interval between what you think you see and what is actually happening 3 meters outside your vision. Most survivors commit the same fatal error. They try to recreate daylight. They add more fire, more lamps, more glow. They believe light restores balance. But in a post-collapse raid environment, light only exposes you, your resources, your movement, and your exact position. The real principle is not illumination. It is controlled deprivation. Darkness becomes asymmetric when you decide who sees what. You do not fight the night, you sculpt it. You turn it into a barrier, a filter, a currency. You adapt your perception without granting your enemies the same privilege. This is where the idea of the controlled darkness protocol emerges. It is not poetic, it is mathematical. You reduce your own visual signature while expanding your sensory envelope. You deny the enemy clarity while maintaining a stable input of actionable information. You remove the instinct to fear the dark and replace it with the discipline to manipulate it. Understand this: nighttime raids succeed because defenders freeze. Their cognitive load spikes when their eyes fail, and the brain runs calculations based on incomplete data. Raiders exploit that delay. 3 seconds of uncertainty is all they need to close distance, flank a perimeter, or misdirect your response. Asymmetric darkness strips you of initiative. The controlled darkness protocol restores it. It forces you to break the assumption that seeing is the primary method of detection. It trains you to base your reactions on sound gradients, micro-vibrations, heat patterns, airflow shifts, and timing anomalies. When you rely on only one sense, you hand your life to probability. When you diversify your sensory channels, you strip probability out of the equation. This is the shift most survivors never make. They still operate from the psychology of the old world. Dark means wait. But in the post-collapse world, waiting is death. Night is the raider's laboratory. They test your thresholds, your patterns, your watch rotations, your panic response. They learn the timbre of your whispers. They map your perimeter through how your light sources flicker against debris. They let you reveal yourself. You don't lose at night because you're outnumbered or outgunned. You lose because you're out-informed. Asymmetric darkness ends the moment you recognize that darkness is not the absence of advantage, but the tool that defines advantages. Once you stop trying to overcome it and instead learn to own it, the dynamic flips violently. Raiders lose the one element they depend on: unchecked approach. The battlefield becomes equal, then tilts in your favor. Their confidence fractures when their silence is detected. Their timing collapses when their heat signatures are exposed. Their momentum dies when their approach is mapped before they cross your perimeter. And you, for the first time, operate without fear. You operate with certainty. You operate with dominance. This part is the doctrine you will carry into every tool that follows. Tools do not save you. Principles do. The 7 night defense tools only work when they are extensions of this principle. You do not fight the dark, you command it. Infrared perception is not an upgrade. It is a replacement for the human eye, a rejection of the biological limitations that darkness exploits. When the world collapsed, vision returned to its primitive state. Short range, easily deceived, vulnerable to shadow and silence. Raiders understand this better than the survivors they hunt. They operate on the assumption that you are looking for shapes when you should be looking for heat. This is why infrared systems are not high-tech luxuries. They are the first true weapon that restores initiative in nocturnal engagements. The human eye fails instantly at night. Thermal logic does not. Infrared perception systems shift the battlefield from the visible spectrum to the thermal spectrum. In the visible world, raiders can blend into shadow, freeze to stay hidden, or time their advance between your scanning arcs. In the thermal world, none of that matters. A crouched figure behind a tree is a glowing silhouette. A slow-moving approach becomes a moving heat trail. Even when an attacker lies prone beneath debris, their breath blooms into the air like a flare. Darkness can hide objects. It cannot hide temperature. That is the tactical truth. When you put infrared between yourself and the night, you change the terms of conflict. You deny the raiders the only element they depend on, invisibility. Night raids succeed because defenders cannot see the approach until the last 20 meters. Thermal optics push that detection threshold into a different category, sometimes 50 meters, sometimes 80, sometimes more, depending on terrain, humidity, and weather. Even through light foliage, the heat bleed gives them away. And the psychological effect on you is immediate. Anxiety collapses, replaced by procedural focus. You are no longer guessing. You are tracking. You are no longer reacting. You are anticipating. Understand this clearly. Raiders are confident only when unseen. Their tactics rely on stealth, coordination, and the illusion of omnipresence. When you see them first, their confidence fractures. Their timing falters. They go from hunters to silhouettes pinned against the terrain. Infrared perception forces them into a battlefield they are not prepared to fight. One where their camouflage is irrelevant, their speed predictable, their silhouettes unmistakable. The mistake most survivors make is treating infrared like a spotlight, something to turn on only when they believe danger is near. That is daytime logic leaking into a nighttime world. Infrared is not a tool you activate, it is a state you adopt. You move with it, patrol with it, rest with it, positioned at key vantage points. When the grid collapsed, the night became an information desert. Infrared turns it back into an information field. Every heat signature becomes data. Data becomes prediction. Prediction becomes survival. But the greatest advantage is not simply detection. It is the way infrared perception rewrites your psychology. Fear feeds on the unknown. Thermal vision annihilates the unknown. The moment you can see what others believe is hidden, the darkness stops being a threat. It becomes your territory. Raiders sense this shift. The quiet confidence in your movement, the lack of hesitation, the refusal to panic. They read it instantly because it signals something they do not want to face. Their advantage is gone, and you are operating in a spectrum they cannot manipulate. Infrared systems create a battlefield where you are always the first to know, never the last. And in a post-collapse night raid, knowing first is the closest thing you have to absolute power. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a channel of information, if you know how to listen. Raiders understand this well enough to weaponize it. Survivors, however, still cling to primitive alarms that scream, flash, or broadcast their fear across the tree line. Noise-based alarms belong to the old world, where neighbors were allies and police response existed. In the post-collapse environment, noise is a spotlight aimed directly at your position. The moment an alarm reveals you, raiders collapse onto the point of origin with mechanical certainty. That is why the only alarms worth deploying now are the ones that speak to you without speaking to your enemy. Silent perimeter systems designed to deliver information without exposure. Silent perimeter alarms are the nervous system of any night defense doctrine. They do not announce danger outward. They whisper it inward. They exist to extend your perception beyond the range of human hearing and even beyond the reach of your infrared tools. These devices detect disturbance before disturbance becomes proximity. A single tension shift in a trip line, A micro vibration on the ground, a break in a magnetic field, or the threshold crossing of a low-profile sensor, these signals travel through wire, frequency, or haptic relay directly to you and only you. Raiders never hear them. Raiders never see them. Raiders never understand that the moment they step across your perimeter, they have already been categorized, timed, and placed on a mental map that puts their life expectancy in the low minutes. The principle is simple. Information is only valuable if the enemy does not know you have it. Silent alarms grant you that secrecy. They break the raiders' confidence in approach by robbing them of their perceived invisibility. The advantage a nighttime attacker expects is built on the belief that you are blind until they choose to reveal themselves. When your silent perimeter alarm goes off, that advantage evaporates. You know where they breached, how many points were triggered, the direction of their movement, and the pace of their advance. Meanwhile, they assume they are still undetected. You hold initiative, and they walk forward with false confidence. This creates an invisible tactical asymmetry. Raiders believe the engagement hasn't begun. You already know exactly where to position your tools, how to manipulate your lighting discipline, when to ready your thermal optics, and where to channel their path into a kill corridor or misdirection zone. Silent alarms transform chaos into choreography. They turn a potentially lethal surprise into a predictable sequence. The psychological shift this brings cannot be overstated. Survivors without silent alarms are reactive, anxious, and disoriented the moment their ears catch the first hint of movement. Survivors with silent alarms are calm, cold, and procedural. The former group loses precious seconds scrambling for clarity. The latter group gains entire minutes to set conditions for survival. Darkness punishes emotion. Silent alarms restore logic. But the real power of silent perimeter alarm systems lies in what raiders never realize. Their first mistake is not crossing your perimeter. It is assuming the perimeter was ever unmonitored. When your system captures their approach silently, you turn the night into a trap, and you do so without generating a single sound that could redirect their strategy. Raiders cannot adapt to information they do not know you possess, and when the engagement finally breaks open, they have no understanding of how thoroughly you prepared for them. That ignorance is fatal. Silent perimeter alarms redefine defense. They convert the night from a shapeless threat into a measurable, predictable, controllable space. In a post-collapse world, survival belongs to the one who hears first and reveals nothing. Light is not safety. Light is exposure. Every survivor who dies at night shares the same fatal impulse. They try to use illumination the way they used it before the collapse. They turn on lanterns to feel secure. They build fires to claim territory. They flood their perimeter with white light because they believe it pushes the darkness back. But in a post-collapse raid environment, uncontrolled light does not push anything back. It invites the enemy forward. The moment you reveal your shape, your posture, your tools, or your movement, you give raiders a visual blueprint for the kill. Low-profile night lighting exists for one purpose: to let you see without being seen. It is not an aesthetic choice. It is a survival protocol. The world after the collapse reshaped the physics of engagement, and light became a tactical language. When you use it wrong, you speak loudly. When you use it correctly, you speak in whispers raiders cannot decode. The first principle is red light discipline. Red wavelengths do not bloom across open terrain the way white light does. They do not destroy your night vision. They do not telegraph your position across a field or through broken windows. Red light grants you functional visibility, while preserving your silhouette. In the dark, silhouette is life. Anything that expands or sharpens it becomes a liability. Raiders depend on that silhouette. They use moonlight, campfires, LED spill, and accidental reflections to map your location. Red light discipline denies them that map. But light control is more than color. It is geometry. Narrow beams do not wash over terrain. They carve through it. A narrow beam allows you to search without announcing the direction of your attention. Raiders watch for scanning arcs. Every survivor who sweeps a flashlight in a wide gesture exposes two critical pieces of information: where they are and what area they are afraid of. A narrow beam, kept low or bounced off surfaces, erases these tells. You gather information without revealing your priorities. Bounce-lit environments push this even further. Instead of shining light directly at surfaces, you angle it off the ground, walls, or reflective debris. This creates diffused illumination that doesn't betray your position. Raiders look for point sources, the bright nucleus of a beam. When you bounce light instead of projecting it, you operate inside a soft halo that only you benefit from. Your outline remains invisible. Their eyes search the wrong places. Low-profile lighting changes your relationship with darkness. Without it, you move like prey. Hands out, breaths held, every footstep calculated to avoid tripping or making noise. With it, you move like someone who understands the battlefield. You control what you see. You control what you hide. You turn darkness into cover rather than an obstacle. Every shadow becomes an ally. Every pocket of blackness becomes a blindfold you place on your enemy instead of yourself. And the psychological impact is immediate. Raiders expect defenders to panic with light. They expect erratic beams, trembling hands, frantic sweeps of the horizon. When they see none of this, when the environment is lit in a way that gives them nothing, they lose confidence. Their calculations fail. They approach slower. They hesitate. And hesitation is the first crack in their tempo. The tempo you will break entirely in the later stages of engagement. Low-profile night lighting is not about visibility. It is about control. The collapse stripped humanity of many illusions, but none is more dangerous than the belief that light equals safety. In the world you now inhabit, light is a blade. You wield it with intent, precision, and discipline, or it cuts you instead. Sound is the second battlefield of the night, and unlike vision, it cannot be switched off. In darkness, every footstep becomes a coordinate, every breath a signature, every shift in weight a revelation. Raiders understand this intuitively. They weaponize silence, not by eliminating sound, but by shaping it. Pausing at specific intervals, syncing their movements, letting the ambient noise conceal their approach. Survivors who rely on their ears alone are already defeated. Human hearing is imprecise, emotional, and easily misled. The night uses it against you. Acoustic mapping devices exist to correct that flaw. They do not amplify noise. They translate it into clarity. When you deploy acoustic mapping in a post-collapse raid environment, you stop listening like a mammal and start listening like a machine. These devices read the world through vibration, frequency separation, directional gradients, and resonance analysis. A raider dragging a boot through dry soil produces a signature entirely different from one stepping through wet leaves. The device decodes both. The range extends beyond what the human ear can meaningfully process, capturing micro shifts that register long before the attacker is close enough to hear. Raiders believe silence hides them. Acoustic mapping ensures it never does. The core advantage lies in directionality. In the dark, the brain struggles to locate the origin of sound. Echo, humidity, wind, terrain contour. These distortions fracture your perception. Raiders exploit this. They create false signals, toss stones, or let one member break a twig intentionally to draw your attention, while the real approach circles in from another angle. Acoustic mapping breaks their deception. It triangulates sound sources with mathematical precision, separating foreground noise from background interference. It identifies the true vector of movement, turning their misdirection into a self-inflicted exposure. But the deeper strength of these devices is what they give you beyond location. Rhythm. People move with patterns. Calm attackers move differently from desperate ones. Experienced raiders maintain measured spacing between footsteps. Amateurs rush, hesitate, or cluster. Acoustic mapping systems convert these rhythms into readable data. They reveal whether you face one threat or several, whether they are trained or chaotic, whether they are probing or committing. Your tactical mind no longer reacts. It predicts. This predictive capacity shifts the entire engagement. Before a raider even crosses your silent perimeter alarms, you may already know how many there are, what direction they will rotate from, and whether they intend a frontal breach or a flanking maneuver. In the dark, knowledge is territory. The more you know before you see, the larger your territory becomes. Survivors without acoustic mapping fight phantoms, shadows they imagine, threats they can't place, fear magnified by uncertainty. Survivors with acoustic mapping fight coordinates. They wait with cold discipline, knowing exactly when the attacker will reach a funnel point or when they will expose themselves to a sensor arc. Raiders rely on inducing panic through ambiguity. Acoustic mapping eliminates ambiguity. It denies them their greatest psychological weapon, and the psychological reversal is devastating. Raiders expect to stalk you. Instead, every sound they make is logged, mapped, and interpreted. Every breath becomes a timestamp. Every misstep becomes a warning they unknowingly deliver. They walk toward you believing they command the night. They do not realize the night has turned informant. Acoustic mapping devices are not just tools. They are a new sensory organ, one that darkness cannot deceive, one that raiders cannot silence, one that removes chance from the equation entirely. Once you hear the night this way, you never fear it again. You own it. Close quarters in the dark are not arenas of precision. They are eruptions, fast, disorienting, violent. When a raider breaches the perimeter and crosses into your immediate zone, you have seconds, sometimes less, to erase their momentum. This is the moment where most survivors die. Not because they lack strength or courage, but because they rely on weapons designed for clean conditions, visible engagement, and conscious decision-making. Nighttime close-quarter encounters are not clean. They are collisions of instinct and fear. That is why you do not rely on tools that require perfect aim, clear vision, or extended motion. You rely on shock deterrence, devices engineered to break the attacker's initiative in an instant before they can convert proximity into dominance. Shock deterrents are not about force. They are about interruption. The goal is not to overpower the attacker, but to rupture their coordination, their breath cycle, their spatial awareness. A raider entering your space expects terror, struggle, or blind aggression. What they do not expect is sudden sensory overload delivered with cold calculation. When deployed correctly, a shock deterrent halts a trained attacker as effectively as an inexperienced one. Pain can be endured. Confusion cannot. The principle behind these tools is simple. Remove their ability to act. A flash in the visible spectrum ruins your night vision, but a directed micro-flash at close range obliterates theirs while you remain behind cover or shielded by angle. A pressure-based concussive burst overwhelms their inner ear, turning balance into chaos. A contact-based electrical deterrent introduces involuntary muscular lock, forcing the body to betray its intentions. These effects last seconds, sometimes only fractions of a second, but nighttime combat is decided in those fractions. Close-quarter shock deterrents buy you time. Time to reposition, time to create distance, time to bring the engagement back into the range of your controlled tools. Infrared, perimeter alarms, acoustic maps. Raiders depend on closing space to nullify your advantage. Shock deterrents reopen that space instantly, turning their commitment into a liability. But the true power of these tools is not physical. It is psychological. Raiders enter a breach expecting fear. When they encounter calculated resistance instead, their confidence fractures. They came believing they were predators. They discover they are participants in a system you already prepared. Shock deterrents communicate a message. The engagement is not chaotic. It is engineered. You are not surprised. You are waiting. That realization spreads through a raiding group faster than any wound. Even the ones who have not yet entered the breach feel the shift. Their timing falters. Their coordination dissolves. You break not just the attacker. You break the momentum of the entire raid. The collapse changed the rules of violence. In the dark, precision is unreliable, emotion is dangerous, and hesitation is fatal. Shock deterrents thrive because they do not depend on any of these variables. They turn the close-quarter moment from a desperate struggle into a controlled event, a pause, a reset, a decisive interruption. You do not overpower the attacker. You remove their ability to attack. When proximity becomes inevitable, deterrence becomes survival. In the ruins of the world, those who live are not the strongest or fastest. They are the ones who create 1 second of advantage and convert it into control. Shock deterrents give you that second. What you do with it determines everything that follows. Manipulation is the highest form of defense. When the grid fell and night reclaimed the world, most survivors tried to defend their ground by hardening it. More barricades, more obstacles, more layers of visibility control. Raiders learned to adapt. They studied patterns, mapped weaknesses, and exploited blind spots. But there is one element raiders cannot adapt to because it violates their expectations at the psychological level. Artificial sound designed to distort perception. Directional noise generators are not weapons in the traditional sense. They are instruments of cognitive warfare. Their purpose is not to harm a raider's body, but to fracture the internal model of reality that every attacker depends on. In darkness, the mind fills gaps automatically. It creates assumptions based on faint cues, fragmented echoes, and subconscious pattern recognition. Raiders rely heavily on these assumptions during approach because visual information is scarce and every decision must be made with incomplete data. A directional noise generator exploits this weakness by creating false data, clear enough to be believable, faint enough to be alarming, and precise enough to divert, fragment, or freeze an advance. Sound becomes architecture. You build walls the raiders cannot see, corridors they assume exist but don't, openings they believe are safe but lead nowhere. They move according to a map you create, not the terrain that actually surrounds them. This is the essence of battlefield misdirection. You do not simply confuse the enemy, you give them a conclusion that feels correct. A raider hears a metallic clink to their right. They assume a defender repositioned. A low thud behind them implies a second perimeter. A rustle ahead suggests a larger group waiting in ambush. None of it needs to be true. The accuracy of the sound matters less than the timing. When you layer these auditory illusions atop your already silent alarms, thermal perception, and lighting discipline, the raiders experience a total collapse of certainty. They cannot trust what they hear, and without trust, their coordination breaks. Coordination is the lifeblood of any raid. Raiders who cannot sync movement, confirm position, or interpret cues lose tempo. They slow down, hesitate, retreat, or split unintentionally. Splitting is the most fatal outcome for them and the most advantageous for you. A fractured raiding group becomes a sequence of isolated threats instead of a unified force. Directional noise generators catalyze that fracture by exploiting the inherent paranoia of darkness. A raider who doubts the environment is less dangerous than one who doubts his team. Once suspicion enters a group, was that you? Who moved? Who's on the left flank? Cohesion dissolves, and in that dissolution you gain absolute control. These tools also manipulate depth perception. A subtle noise positioned far away can be engineered to sound close. A loud, transient sound can be shaped to feel distant. When raiders lose their ability to judge distance, they lose their ability to time an approach. Their advance becomes erratic. Their probing becomes inconsistent. Their breathing changes. And more importantly, their courage falters. Darkness is only powerful to those who believe they own it. When you corrupt their sensory input, you take ownership away. You turn the night from their ally into their adversary. Survivors who do not use directional sound remain trapped in the same static defensive mindset. Wait, watch, hope. Survivors who master directional sound turn defense into psychological offense. They dictate where raiders look, how they move, and what they fear. They can funnel a group into a choke point without a single physical barricade. They can stall an advance long enough to prepare shock deterrence. They can create the illusion of multiple defenders when they are alone. In a world where numbers often decide survival, the ability to manufacture the perception of numbers is a weapon in itself. Raiders expect resistance. They expect fear. They expect the clumsy, reactive noise of survivors scrambling in the dark. What they do not expect is engineered silence paired with manufactured sound, a combination that rewrites the rules of engagement entirely. Directional noise generators do not fight the enemy. They rewrite the enemy's understanding of what the battlefield even is. In doing so, they make the night work for you, not against you. Staying alive at night is not about standing your ground. It is about refusing to be where the enemy expects you to be. Every failed defense in the post-collapse world shares the same flaw: static positioning. Survivors anchor themselves to fixed spots, behind barricades, inside structures, at predetermined vantage points, believing stability equals control. But nighttime raids do not reward stability. They punish it. Darkness is fluid. Raiders are fluid. The battlefield shifts every second. If you remain still, you become predictable. And predictability is the raw material raiders use to shape your death. Mobility-based defense platforms exist to break that predictability. They are not armor in the old world sense. They are movement systems. Gear, footwear, modular protection, and ultralight loadouts designed to let you move with precision in the dark without broadcasting your position. Traditional body armor protects you from penetration. Mobility armor protects you from becoming a stationary target. In the night, the latter matters far more. True night mobility begins with silence. Not the cinematic silence of soft footsteps on perfect flooring, but engineered silence. footwear designed to disperse weight evenly, treads that deform without snapping twigs, fabrics that do not rasp against themselves, plates that do not rattle. Raiders listen for hesitation, friction, contact noise. When your movement profile erases these, you become a phantom inside your own perimeter. You reposition without revealing the axis of your shift. You flank a raider without alerting his teammates. You withdraw without creating panic in your own ranks. Silence is not stealth. Silence is freedom. But mobility is more than walking quietly. It is the ability to change elevation, direction, and cover instantly. Mobility platforms integrate climb assist grips, reinforced knee supports, and ultralight external frames that distribute load away from the spine, letting you crouch, pivot, or drop prone without losing balance. Raiders expect defenders to freeze when they attack. When you move instead, fast, precise, deliberate, you shatter their assumptions about the engagement. A defender who moves at night is a defender raiders cannot map. And what raiders cannot map, they cannot dominate. Mobility also dictates your relationship with distance. Infrared systems, silent alarms, and acoustic mapping give you information. Mobility converts that information into positional advantage. You do not wait for raiders to reach the choke point. You arrive first. You do not let them surround you. You break their angle before they complete the maneuver. You do not remain in the path of their advance. You fold around the flank and turn their momentum against them. When mobility becomes part of your doctrine, every approach path becomes a trap you can spring or escape at will. Psychologically, mobility destabilizes raiders more than any weapon. They enter the engagement believing you are confined. When they realize you are not, their confidence ruptures. They lose their frame of reference. Their internal map collapses. They swing towards sounds that no longer represent your position. They commit to angles that are already obsolete. Their aggression transforms into confusion, and confusion turns into fear. Raiders expect resistance. They do not expect unpredictability. They do not expect an enemy who moves through darkness with the assurance of someone who owns it. But the greatest strength of mobility-based platforms is simple. They minimize the penalty of retreat. In the old world, retreat meant failure. In the post-collapse world, retreat is repositioning. It is conservation. It is predatory. Mobility lets you break contact without losing control. You withdraw to create distance, reset your angles, or lure the raiders into zones shaped by your alarms, sound generators, and lighting traps. Mobility erases the illusion that defense must be static. True defense is dynamic. True defense is movement. True defense is choosing where the engagement happens, not waiting for the enemy to decide. In the end, mobility is the antidote to inevitability. Night raids feel inevitable because survivors treat the night as a cage. Mobility platforms turn that cage into open terrain. Terrain you navigate with discipline and intention. Raiders thrive on patterns. Mobility denies them patterns. Raiders thrive on hesitation. Mobility eliminates hesitation. Raiders thrive on knowing where you are. Mobility ensures they never do. When darkness becomes fluid, only those who move with it survive. The final doctrine is simple, and it is merciless. Survival at night is not a contest of strength, courage, or luck. It is a contest of information, control, and the ability to impose structure onto a battlefield that was designed to erase it. Raiders succeed because they believe darkness belongs to them. Survivors die because they believe darkness is an enemy they must endure. Both are wrong. Darkness is neutral. It serves whoever commands it with greater discipline. Everything in the previous parts leads to one truth. Night defense is not about tools, it is about transformation. Tools extend your senses, but doctrine reshapes your mind. Infrared perception gives you sight where nature denies it. Silent perimeter alarms give you warning without exposure. Low-profile lighting gives you control over visibility. Acoustic mapping gives you distance from uncertainty. Shock deterrence gives you seconds of dominance in close quarters. Directional noise generators give you psychological leverage. Mobility platforms give you freedom from predictability. But none of these matter unless you adopt the operating principle that binds them. You do not defend against raids. You prevent raids from becoming engagements in the first place. This world does not reward reaction. Reaction belongs to the old world, the world that promised sirens, neighbors, institutions, and predictable threats. The collapse stripped all of that away, leaving only the raw physics of conflict. In that physics, the one who acts first owns the tempo. The one who controls tempo owns the threat. The one who owns the threat controls survival. Every raid that ends quickly ends because one side seizes the initiative and never surrenders it. Night amplifies initiative. It multiplies the effects of discipline. It punishes every hesitation and exposes every instinct that evolution never prepared you to overcome. When you master night defense, you master yourself. You strip out instinct and replace it with procedure. You replace fear with prediction, prediction with intent, intent with execution. Raiders expect to hunt people who cling to emotion. They do not expect to face someone governed by operational logic. They do not expect a defender who sees before they see, hears before they hear, moves before they move, and manipulates the environment faster than they can interpret it. Night becomes your territory, not because you are stronger, but because you are colder, quieter, and more deliberate. This is the doctrine that closes the circle. You are not the hunted. You are not the prey huddling in a dark perimeter. You are the architect of the battlefield. You decide what the raiders see. You decide what they hear. You decide what they think is real. You decide where they move, where they stall, where they break, and where they die. You impose order on the only environment raiders believed they owned. That is the death of their advantage. In the post-collapse world, survival is never guaranteed, but predictable death is. You eliminate predictable death by eliminating predictable behavior. You eliminate predictable behavior by replacing instinct with protocol. And once protocol governs your night defense, the darkness no longer compresses your world. It expands it. It becomes the medium through which you operate with deadly clarity. The world that existed before the collapse rewarded comfort. The world after the collapse rewards control. Those who understand this doctrine do not merely withstand the night, they command it. And those who command the night do not survive raids. They prevent raids from ever becoming threats. This is the final truth every survivor must accept. The night is only dangerous to those who refuse to own it.